Greetings, correspondent, principal, chief guest, teachers, other members of the faculty, and prospective delegates. In the words of the former Secretary General of the United Nations, His Excellency Ban Ki-moon, ours can be the first generation to end poverty and the last generation to address climate change. Conferences discussing global affairs can play a large role in shaping young minds and metamorphosing them into the conscious leaders of tomorrow. MUNs have been an integral part of Chettinad Vidyashram since their inception in the Chennai MUN circuit and stand as highly encouraged features of our curriculum.
Yeah, it's fine.
Starting off as an inter-school event, we are proud to say that this year marks the 12th edition of Chettinad Vidyashram Model United Nations. All big things have small beginnings indeed. Serving as one of South India's largest and most anticipated MUNs, we hope to make this session a milestone in your journey. This auditory platform is an amalgamation of agendas ranging from the discussion of nuclear security in the Middle East and North African region to right to life and the East African humanitarian crisis. With a generous amount of productivity and a lot in store, we heartily welcome you all, esteemed members of this conference. Thank you, Mr. John Ashok Vardarajan, for gracing us with your valuable presence.
We'll take care of that.
We also express our gratitude for our beloved Meena Auntie, Principal and Vice Principal, and the delegates who fill this ceremony with energy and vigor. So, brace yourselves, because this two-day experience will certainly not be one that you'll easily forget.
We commence this event invoking the blessings of the Almighty, the most beneficial and merciful. We also present to you a Tamil devotional song, Gananatha, in Sindhu Bhairavi Ragam, invoking the blessings of Lord Ganesha. Our school choir will now present the prayer. Let us all join to resonate the Spirit's energy.
Gananatha, Gananatha, Mushikavahana, Jaya Gananatha, Charanam Charanam Gajanana, Gananatha, Gananatha, Mushikavahana, Jaya Gananatha, Charanam Charanam Gajanana, Siddhi Vinayaka Gananatha, Buddhi Pradayaka Gananatha, Siddhi Vinayaka Gananatha, Buddhi Pradayaka Gananatha, Jagadodara Jaya Gananatha, Charanam Charanam Gajanana, Jagadodara Jaya Gananatha, Charanam Charanam Gajanana, Gananatha, Gananatha.
Astute, adroit, amiable, and zealous are some words one could use to describe our correspondent, Dr. Mrs. Meena Muttaya, lovingly referred to as Meena Auntie. But these words can never fully encapsulate Auntie's personality. An ardent believer in the ideology and act of kindness can go a long way. Auntie embodies what it means to be an empowered woman and a renowned philanthropist in the modern age. Unfortunately, Auntie could not join us today, but she sends her blessings and has a message for us. I'm glad to be a part of the Model United Nations, organized entirely by the students under the guidance of their teachers. It is our privilege to have Sri John Ashok Varadarajan as the chief guest for this year's Model United Nations. It is fitting that he is here to encourage our students. He is currently the vice chairman of a group of educational institutions. Earlier, he has been holding a key position as a political advisor on the peacekeeping department of the United Nations. It is certain that his worldly wisdom, augmented by his experience in travel around the globe, will inspire young boys and girls to reach great heights. We welcome him to this Chettinad Vidyashram Model United Nations and also thank him for giving his consent, especially at the toughest time like this. Thank you.
True professionalism lies in the commitment to a combination of determination and progress. An epitome of excellence in the field of education, Mrs. Amuda Lakshmi, our principal, sets herself apart from other academicians because of her ideals and firm composure. Being an impactful speaker herself, she has taken up instilling and inculcating these qualities of eloquence in her students at the grassroots levels too. She has always encouraged active participation and developing individual interest in public speaking, discussing global issues, raising politically oriented opinions, and competitive learning. With your exuberant guidance and motivation, ma'am, our institution will reach greater heights. I would now like to request our most respected principal, ma'am, to enlighten us with her words.
The year 2020 brought together the entire human race to defeat something which was unexpected and unnatural. But what is remarkable is the fact that the human will turn out to be stronger than all that wish to bring it down. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pride and privilege to welcome you all to the 12th edition of Model United Nation at Chettinad Vidyashram, and this time we meet on virtual platform. I remember reading one of Maya Angelou's speeches and it seemed quite apt to quote here. It takes a phenomenal amount of courage for around this world, your world, my world, there are conflicts, brutalities, humiliations, terrors, murders around this world. However, on the other hand, what you have first is your courage. You may lean against it, it will hold you up. And the joy of achievement, the ecstasy of achievement, it enlightens and lightens at the same time. It is a marvelous thing. Today, your joy begins. Today, your work begins. You're phenomenal. I believe that you're phenomenal. I know us to be. And that is what the year has taught us about. To lean on our courage and find the limitless possibilities of creating new opportunities and new avenues for thought process. It's been a trying year, but the zest of our Meena auntie, the Kumar Rani of Chettinad, has been exemplary. She has never failed to encourage and support endeavors benefits the students and their personality building. We are very grateful to you, auntie. Thank you, auntie. I deem it an honor to welcome our chief guest, Mr. John Ashok Varadarajan, the Vice Chairman of Rover Group of Institution, Perambalur. He has worked with the United Nations for 10 years as a political advisor with the Department of Peacekeeping Operation. In his capacity, he worked with a broad range of political leaders, civil society organizations, diplomatic corps, UN agencies, international organizations, NATO officials, and assorted NGOs. Mr. Ashok is also the political organizer for the Indian National Congress and is actively involved in various social issues. Well traveled across Asia, Europe, Africa, Australia, he is a polyglot. Thank you for accepting our invite and giving us your precious time, sir. Thank you so much. I take great joy in welcoming all the delegates whom I'm sure are going to make an impact on the society as they discuss world affairs today. This is a testimony to their empathy towards the humankind. I take this opportunity to thank my team of teachers and my students for all their efforts taken to make this day happen. Continuing to quote Maya Angelou, which carries pertinence for today and forever. If a human being dreams a great dream, dares to love somebody, if a human being dares to be a Martin King or a Mahatma Gandhi or Mother Teresa or Malcolm X, if a human being dares to be bigger than the condition into which he or she was born, it means so can you. So you can try to stretch yourself so you can internalize. I am a human being, nothing human can be alien to me. That's one thing I'm learning, she concludes. You declare you see me dimly, though a glass which will not shine. though I stand before you boldly, trim in rank and marking time. You do owe to hear me faintly as a whisper out of range, while my drums beat out the message and the rhythms never change. Equality and I will be free, equality and I will be free. You announce my ways are wanton, that I fly from man to man, but if I'm just a shadow to you, could you ever understand? We have lived a painful history, we know the shameful past, but I keep on marching forward and you keep on coming last. Equality and I will be free, equality and I will be free. Take the blinders from your vision, take the padding from your ears, and confess you've heard me crying and admit you've seen my tears. Hear the tempo so compelling, hear the blood throb in my veins. Yes, my drums are beating nightly and the rhythms never change. Equality, I will be free, equality and I will be free. Let us all work together for a world of peace, goodwill and love, bereft of pain and suffering. Thank you, God bless us all.
Our chief guest today, Mr. John Ashok Vardarajan, is the Vice Chairman of the Rover Group of Educational Institutions in Perambalur, Tamil Nadu since 2009 and is working on professionalizing the management of the family-run business. Earlier, Mr. Ashok worked with the United Nations for 10 years as a political advisor with the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, serving in Kosovo and Serbia. In this capacity, he worked on post-conflict nation-building activities, including devising policies on good governance, advising the local governments on governance issues, capacity building, analyzing and reporting on political developments, and providing early warning and strategy recommendations. As political advisor, he worked with a broad range of government officials, political party leaders, civil society organizations, the diplomatic corps, UN agencies, international organizations, NATO officials, and assorted NGOs. We simply swell with pride and are cognizant of our honor of being able to host Mr. Ashok as our chief guest. And we have no doubt that his words, accentuated by his years of expertise and experience with political affairs and the workings of the United Nations, will serve to motivate the delegates and will set the precedent for what will come.
Thank you very much for the wonderful introduction and the inaugural welcome address. Can I start with the PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I thought instead of me just talking, I thought I would just make a PowerPoint presentation so that you can visualize what the UN does and what I did when I was in Kosovo and Serbia. So United Nations, as you know, was founded in 1945, but it has a long history before that. After the World War I, few nations got together and started the League of Nations, but it failed for a number of reasons, and that led to World War II. So at the end of World War II, or even during World War II, many of the Allied powers got together and decided that they need a better, robust international organization where they can sit and talk to each other instead of going to war at the drop of a hat. So that was the seed for starting the United Nations. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So UN right now is 75 years old, and in envisioning UN, I don't think the founders would have thought that in 75 years there has not been any major wars or major disasters.
So our chief guest is facing slight technical issues at this point of time, so we'll wait for him to rejoin the meeting so that he can continue his address.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Sorry, I think the network just dropped.
No issue.
And next slide, please. Yeah. So in 1942 itself, some of the countries came together, including India. India was that time the dominion of the British Empire, but they had the Constituent Assembly. So India also signed on with the emerging United Nations. Next slide, please. After much discussion, in 1945, they signed the Charter of the United Nations in San Francisco. And all the allied powers, most of the European nations, basically, and the United States, they all came together to sign this charter and giving birth to the United Nations. Next, please. So this was heralded as one of the major news-breaking event in 1945, just after the end of the Second World War. So the basic charter of the United Nations said that this United Nations is created to prevent wars and also to ensure that human rights are guaranteed across the world. So this was the original idea of the United Nations, is to stop wars between nations and also to ensure that human rights was guaranteed, because they just discovered that millions and millions of Jewish people were segregated from the general population, and they were taken to the concentration camps and were executed just because of their ethnicity and their race. This was a big shock to the world, because they had only heard about reports about Jews being exterminated, but then only when the Allied powers liberated the concentration camps, they realized the immensity of the situation, and the number of Jews that were killed eventually was officially about 6 million Jewish people were killed during World War II, and most of them in Germany, in many of the concentration camps. So it was very, very shocking to the world that during the World War II, that a particular race was singled out and completely exterminated. Next slide, please. So the United Nations Charter initially talked about ending wars and also to reaffirm its faith in fundamental human rights, dignity, and worth of the human person. Next slide, please. Basically, the four main goals at that time in 1945 was to maintain international peace and security and develop friendly relations among nations, because there were not many treaties, bilateral treaties among nations in those times. It also talked about promoting social progress. And as I said earlier, human rights was one of the biggest concerns for the United Nations. Next slide, please. But over the years, it was not only about war and peace and human rights, but there were a lot of other issues like the environmental degradation, a lot of refugees because of internal wars within a particular nation, disaster relief because of earthquakes, floods, and so on. With the dropping of the nuclear bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the world realized that the destructive power of nuclear bombs could lead to more arms race and could lead to more destruction. So they set up the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So disarmament and non-proliferation of nuclear weapons was also given top priority. As and when more and more women came into the workforce, gender equality and advancement of women became a major issue for the United Nations, and so did economic and social development. One of the major concerns also was the health and prosperity of various member nations. So the WHO was set up later on, the World Health Organization. Next slide, please. Currently, United Nations has 193 members. It used to have 120 members up to 1960s and 70s, but with the birth of many nations and the death of colonialism, India became a member in 1947. In 1960s, many colonial nations like Portugal, Netherlands, relinquished a lot of their nations in Africa and other parts of Asia. So the numbers kept on increasing. And with the world fracturing more and more in the early 2000s, right now we have 193 member states admitted into the United Nations General Assembly. And all of these 193 member states are considered as equal, and all of them have a single vote. No nation is bigger than the other nation. All of them are treated as equal within the United Nations General Assembly. Next, please. However, United Nations also has another layer called the UN Security Council, which has 15 members, out of which 5 are permanent members and the rest are rotated every 2 years. So this is the most important part of the UN body. This is where they decide on the agenda to be discussed about what's happening around the world, especially urgent matters like war. And they also authorize United Nations to enter into a country, to authorize UN peacekeeping troops, to authorize various UN bodies to enter a country. So this is the United Nations Security Council, which is the final authority for any action that the United Nations ever takes. Next, please. So this is the UN Plaza, which hosts the UN Secretariat, where all the UN employees work, and also the General Assembly building. So this was initially was supposed to be set up in Europe after the World War II, but then the Europe suffered a lot of destruction after World War II. And United States, which emerged victorious, decided that it would be better for them if they could have United Nations on their soil. So the New York billionaire Nelson Rockefeller, he came forward and bought this place called the Turtle Bay, and he donated it free of cost to United Nations to build their UN headquarters, because it was also prestigious for the United Nations, but also New York was relatively safe just after World War II. So they decided that it would be better to have United Nations in New York in the United States. Next, please. So this is like in a nutshell, this is what the UN does. It's not only about peacekeeping. UN has various sister agencies called UN Development Program, UNDP, UNHCR, which takes care of refugees, UNHCHR, which takes care of human rights across the world, WHO, which takes care of health. We have World Food Program, which distributes food in many parts of the world, especially in Africa and some parts of Asia. It also takes care of maternal health. It fights poverty. It keeps peace in 16 countries. It also mobilizes humanitarian aid for people affected by emergencies. UN is also one of the biggest health agencies in the world. So it vaccinates more than 2.5 million people a year. It provides food to 90 million people in 75 countries. This is as of last year. And every year the challenge for the United Nations increases because of more and more internal strife, internal wars, discrimination against a certain group of people. So a lot of people within a country are internally displaced. So UN is the only authorized body which can take care of these kind of situations. Next, please. So this is the area that I worked in for 10 years. So this is a country called Yugoslavia. It used to be a huge country, one of the largest countries in Europe. And this was created just after World War II. So 1945, this new country came into being. It was called Yugoslavia. It was ruled by someone called Marshal Tito. Tito, along with Nehru, founded the non-aligned movement. So Yugoslavia at that time was one of the richest, most advanced progressive countries in Europe. Next, please. But within 10 years, because of various situations, because of ethnic conflict, because of religious and linguistic conflicts, one big country became 5 different countries. So you have Slovenia on the north, then Croatia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, and former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. So one country split into 5 different countries, and there were wars raging on in each of these new countries. Next, please. By 2008, the country further split into 2 more countries, Montenegro and Kosovo. So finally, in 2008, there were 7 countries out of a single country. So how did a single country split into different entities and leading to 7 different nations, birth of new nations? Next, please. So this is the place I worked in. It was called Kosovo, which was part of a Serbian country. This is a place of immense beauty. These are called kulas. These are houses built with stones. These can be seen across the Balkan region in Central Europe. This is where huge families lived from snow and other natural exigencies. And this place is incredibly beautiful. It's blessed by the nature. They call it the mini Switzerland of Europe. Next, please. This monastery is the place I worked in. This was built in 14th century, 1338. This was completed. This was called the Deccan Monastery. It still exists as it was then, and is right now protected by the Italian NATO forces. Incredibly beautiful, wonderful place with wonderful people who are very hospitable and friendly. Next, please. But this place is also where a lot of death and destruction happened because you happen to speak the wrong language, you happen to be belonging to a wrong religion, or you happen to belong to a different race. So thousands and thousands of innocent women, children, men were killed by opposing forces just because they belonged to a different ethnic group. In this case, these were Albanians, ethnic Albanians, who were killed by the ethnic Serbs. They are a different ethnicity, they follow different religions. So Albanians were Muslims and the Serbs were Orthodox Christians. They speak different languages. Serbians spoke Serb, and the Albanians spoke Albania. So this conflict was simmering for more than 10-20 years, and finally in 1997-98, it became a major issue, and many people were being killed and and destroyed. Next, please. Up to 1 million people in Kosovo were kicked out of their houses completely burned and destroyed. They were thrown out of their country, and these were refugees who made their way along a railway track to a neighboring country called Macedonia, where they set up a huge refugee camp. The United Nations Refugee Agency, UNHCR, set up a huge tent city to accommodate more than 1 million people, small children to old people. This was a humanitarian disaster of a huge proportion. That time, Bill Clinton was the president of the United States, and he authorized military strike against Serbia for killing and expelling of millions of refugees. So after the NATO bombing, we went inside. Next, please. So the UN Security Council authorized United Nations to go into Kosovo to help resettle the millions of refugees, to rebuild houses. So this is the way the country looked when we went in. Many houses were destroyed, schools, libraries were burnt to ground, Companies, factories were completely bombarded, and all you saw were shells. Complete death and destruction wherever we went. Next, please. So this is one of the areas that I initially worked in 1999. And as you can see, this used to be a huge settlement. A lot of people, rich people used to live here. It's a beautiful place with a lot of mountains, but then you see the destruction when the war was over. You saw so many people killed and so much property destroyed. Next, please. This is another place where they deliberately destroyed residential quarters where thousands of people were living. The retreating Serb forces deliberately destroyed houses, burnt completely so that the refugees would not come in. But then we were determined to go and rebuild the entire country. Next, please. This was what you call the old bazaar area. These were built during the Ottoman Empire's time. So these were all cobbled pavements, and they had these wonderful, very historic structures. These are all very old buildings with tiled roofs on them. All of them are completely destroyed and gutted by the retreating Serb forces. Next, please. And many of these refugees were living in tents that you can see behind you in the extreme cold. They were living in all these very flimsy tents. UN was providing them with food, medical help, and also we were trying to rebuild their houses. Next, please. Next slide, please. So this is how we started building. The one on the extreme top left, that house was completely destroyed. So we had to build a new house. The one on the extreme right, left, on the right side, you can see it was only the shell was remaining. So we just had to put up a roof. So all these places, we had a different level of destruction. So accordingly, we rebuilt houses, small clinics, and also schools for the children. So this is some of the glimpses of what the United Nations did. Next, please. So a year later, what you see, when I first got there, many of these houses did not have roofs, or they were completely damaged or burnt in the fire. So a year later, you can see it's so beautiful that the people came back to their houses. They started their businesses. They were able to send their children to local schools. Slowly, we rebuilt all of these infrastructure, and we also did institution building. Next, please. So what United Nations does is called nation building. So they go into a place that was completely destroyed by war, and they build institutions. Institutions means having elections, setting up a parliament, setting up local bodies like mayors and councillors. They did not have a proper police force. So the United Nations spent millions of dollars training a police service called the Kosovo Police Service, which included all ethnicities, all linguistic minorities, so that there was no discrimination. These police were trained by the United States and the European police forces, so that they're one of the best in the world right now. Yeah, next, please. So the Kosovo had a guerrilla army called the Kosovo Liberation Army. So after the United Nations came into the country, they disbanded the Liberation Army, the guerrilla force, and we set up a professional security force. This is the local army. They are not authorized to leave their borders. They can only operate within the borders, more like National Guards. And these army forces were trained by the United States Army. So they were more trained very professionally in the same idea and structure of the United States Army. Next, please. So for many, many years, for many centuries, Yugoslavia did not have election because President Marshal Tito was the president for life. From 1945 until his death in 1980, there were no elections. Even if elections were held, he was always the victorious person. So in Kosovo and in Serbia, we had elections for the first time in the year 2000. So in 2000, some of these people were voting for the first time. You couldn't believe the crowd that rushed to select candidates who would take care of their wards, who would take care of their municipality, who would take care of the city, who would become their presidents and prime ministers. They were so happy to come and vote for the very, very first time in their lifetime. Some of them had never voted in their entire lifetime. So this was a very, very momentous occasion. And this was possible only because we were able to come into a country, set up stable institutions like an election commission, like voter verification, provide them with security, because if elections were held without so much security, they would be intimidated by different forces. So the Kosovo Police Service and the Kosovo Security Forces provided a lot of security, and these elections were conducted simultaneously in one single day, and the results were able to announce the next day. Next, please. So right now, these are the leaders of Kosovo. On the left is President Hashim Thaci, who's been one of the longest serving presidents of Kosovo. He was the former head of the Kosovo Liberation Army, the guerrilla force. So he was the commander of the guerrilla force that fought against the Serbian army. Once the United Nations came in, he laid down the arm, he started a political party, and he contested elections, because the United Nations and the European Union insisted that the only way forward is a democracy, and that rule of law, and for people to elect their own leaders. On the right is a very, very young guy, a 40-year-old guy who became the prime minister during the pandemic. So this is how, from what we were 10, 15 years ago, when the country was completely destroyed and there was no hope and there was complete death and destruction, to having these kind of people lead the country out of war and destruction was one of the biggest highlights of my career in the UN, and also a big success story for the United Nations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. I think that was a great presentation. It was very informative, and I'm sure we all learned a lot from you today.
Thank you, Nishant.
The Secretary General of Chettinad Vidyashram Model United Nations 2020, Nishant Kumar, is our school captain and an immensely hardworking and ambitious person. No stranger to the circuit, Nishant has established himself on a plethora of competitive platforms such as MUNs and culturals. His motivation, experience, insight, and sense of initiative are his greatest contributions to CVMUN. I now request Nishant to address the gathering.
Greetings, Mr. John Ashok Vardarajan, Meena Auntie, Principal Ma'am, Vice Principal Ma'am, teachers, and our esteemed delegates. I am both pleased and honored to be speaking to you today in the capacity as the Secretary General of this Model UN competition. I'd like to begin by thanking our principal and teachers for supporting us and helping us organize this MUN given the circumstances we are facing. A global health crisis unlike any other in the 75-year history of the United Nations, infected economies, and an impending recession, this time calls for change. The journey of CVMUN started 12 years ago as an intra-school event with 150 delegates. And in this journey, how far Chettinad Vidyashram has evolved is indeed a landmark. We have elevated through creation, idealized the impossible, transformed ourselves, and it is now finally time to respond, resolve, and revolutionize the world around us. I remember starting my MUN journey in this auditorium 3 years ago. I was just an inexperienced delegate trying to get his facts right. But as I continued MUNing, I grew as an individual. I began to learn about the world, and I became a global citizen. It taught me how to deal with differing perceptions and opinions, and that is what an MUN is about. discussing varied agendas like human rights in Africa, nuclear security in the Middle East, and general geopolitical change. We amassed an extensive amount of knowledge on these subjects. I'd like to quote the former President of the United States. Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. You do not have to be an MUNer to be an aspiring leader or to aspire to change the world. Change isn't just one big event, but a culmination of many small events. And this MUN is the perfect platform to start that journey. It is a forum for us to express our opinions and channelize our thoughts on issues that are plaguing the world. It is time to respond, resolve, and revolutionize. Thank you.
Presenting to you the teaser of the 12th edition of Chettinad Vidyashram Model United Nations. Sit back and enjoy.
By the power vested in me, I, Nishant Kumar, Secretary General of Chettinad Vidyashram Model United Nations 2020, formally declare the conference open.
Hello, everybody. We will now be having a small question and answer session with our esteemed chief guest, Shri John Ashok Varadarajan. Greetings. I'm Arunachalam Raharaman, the Director General of CVMUN 2020, and I will be serving as the moderator for this question and answer session. We have collected numerous questions from our delegates for our esteemed chief guest today. And this Q&A session will be very, very brief in order to accommodate our esteemed chief guest's time. So the first question we have is from Tejas N from the Human Rights Council, and he asks, what grabbed your interest towards a career in politics and peacekeeping, sir?
Shashi Tharoor, who we all know, is a very popular UN diplomat. So he was a family friend. So I was inspired basically by Shashi Tharoor's career and his charisma. And through him, I was able to understand how the UN works and what is needed to prepare yourself for a career in the UN. And I mean, he was my sole inspiration to get into the UN. I mean, there's for a lot of other Indians also. Shashi Tharoor was, is still the inspiration for a lot of young people, even now, to enter into politics or to, be very good in English, to write books, to be presentable, to be an all-round hero. So he was one of my icons. So I was very, very much lucky that I knew him. So I was able to get into the UN through him.
All right, sir. That's actually a great answer. Thank you so much. The next question we have is from Hussein M. Topiwala from the Dissect Committee. And he asks, should the veto system in the United Nations Security Council continue to exist, considering that it often acts as a hurdle to solve issues and has proven to be unfavorable for several other members?
Very, very excellent question. I think many countries feel that this veto system should be abolished because only 5 of these 193 countries wield the veto. The 5 big nations: United States, United Kingdom, France, Russia, and China. But when the United Nations was set up in 1945, these countries were economically and politically and militarily stronger, so they kind of appropriated more authority to themselves. But right now, if you look at the top countries in the world, India has emerged as one of the biggest countries economically, politically, also intellectually. India is one of the biggest exporters, the brain drain. So we have the intellectual capacity to be given a seat at the table. So there were reforms projected for the United Nations that instead of abolishing the veto system, they said they will add 5 to 10 more new countries like India, Brazil, South Africa, so that more countries across the globe are represented. But the veto itself will continue to be a problem, because if anything is discussed against Pakistan, China will veto against that. If anything is discussed against Israel, United States would veto against that. But that's how diplomacy works. Some people would have undue advantage, would have more resources at their disposal, so they would continue to demand that this is the way things would be. Moreover, United States is one of the biggest contributors in terms of money and aid to United Nations. Biggest. They supply everything from materials to personnel to money. Physically, they give a lot of money to the United Nations across Africa, across Asia. So the condition is that they would have veto power, otherwise they wouldn't contribute to the United Nations. So it's like a very tricky situation, but as I said, it's the only platform that exists in the world where we can all get together, sit down and talk. So many of the issues right now being discussed are resolved without the use of a veto power. So a lot of things are getting done. One or two issues may be vetoed because of vested interests of some of the countries. I hope that answers the question.
All right, so that's actually a very, very interesting answer. Yeah, that's actually a very interesting answer. Thank you so much for that. The next question is from Rohit, who is also from the Dissect committee. And he asks, what do you think is the best way to resolve armed conflicts if the other side is not willing to have a peace talk?
And this is what we are seeing in some of the countries in the last 10 years. One good example was Sudan. So Sudan is a very, very huge, it's one of the largest countries in Africa. It's also very oil rich. So the government is rich, the country is rich, but the people are poor. And it's divided north and south, because north is controlled by the Muslims and the south is full of predominantly Christians. So they had an internal civil war. South Sudan and Sudan had a civil war, and lots of people died. So the UN intervened and had to impress upon both sides that, being an oil-rich country, you can't keep going on fighting, because at the end both of you lose. So they were able to make them see the bigger picture. So they convinced the North to give more rights to the South, but eventually that did not happen. So what United Nations did was negotiate the splitting of the country. So now we have South Sudan as a separate country. So only through painstaking diplomacy, lots and lots of international attention to it. You had George Clooney, the Hollywood actor, talking about the war in Sudan, the Darfur region. We had the then Secretary of State, John Kerry. He went many times to that area to negotiate and make both the parties see reason. So it takes a lot of, it's like fight between two kids in your school, and you have to sit and talk to them, make them see the bigger picture that, oh, you guys are friends, you guys from the same school. So that kind of negotiation is what UN is famous for. And also the other big countries like United States, China, Russia, they all joined in and tried to settle a peace. So it's a very tricky situation, but many cases, 99.9% of the time, it succeeds.
Thank you so much for your candor, sir. The last question for the day is, actually a very common question among all our delegates. Upon assuming the role of the political advisor, who were you eagerly waiting to work with in the UN?
So UN has people from more than 100 countries, people with different language skills, different kind of approaching a problem. Americans are more brash, more outspoken, while Indians are a little bit laid back. We always defer to authority and so on. So my initial boss happened to be an Indian IAS officer who came to United Nations on a deputation. So he had a very, very wonderful way of solving problems. So I'll give you one example. So we would go into a negotiation with a very hard position, like do or die, either this or you don't get anything at all. So when you go into that, the other side also becomes very agitated. They refuse. They say, no, we can't agree to this kind of bullying, this kind of intimidation. So immediately you would come up with a compromise, a so-called compromise that we already had worked on. So you would say, okay, then why can't we compromise? And this is the solution that we give you. And immediately they come down from their very strong position and they accept whatever we give. And this IAS officer by the name Ajay Mishra would already have the document printed and ready to be signed, because he knew this was a good strategy that always succeeds. So he would already have the document ready to be signed. So these are small things that I learned in the UN, and also because you have people from different parts of the world, their working styles are different. You learn a lot of professionalism. You learn to to say no without being forceful, and you also say yes without looking like a slave. So you need to negotiate the task that is given to you. You need to talk about the resources that is given to you. If they say go out and get something done, you have to say, what about security issues? What resources do I have? What authority do I have on behalf of the UN to negotiate this or get these things done? So it's like you have to constantly learn on the job. It was a very, very steep learning curve for someone who was educated in Chennai, who grew up in Chennai. So I went to Don Bosco Egmore. I studied there till 12th, and I did my law at Madras Law College. So we all grew up in Chennai, very relaxed place, very nice place. And then suddenly you are in the United Nations, and then it creates a lot of conflict. Because different people have different style of working. But to answer your question precisely, I looked forward to working with the American diplomats, because they were always well prepared. They were always working hard, very, very professional. They praise you if you did well, and they would really chew you out if you did bad. But they were very, very good with giving feedback, and they always encouraged a lot of young people. They always promoted you if you did well. So one of the most professional people, I would say, the Americans, and was very much looking forward to working with them that time.
Thank you so much for your time, sir. It is great having you today. All of your answers were very, very brilliant, and I'm sure all of us enjoyed listening to you. With that, we come to the end of this question and answer session. Thank you so much for the audience for attending the opening ceremony for today. Hopefully you all will have a fun